us into our new series. So we're in a series now for the next several weeks here at 828 called His Perspectives. And I just have been feeling like when we were working together as a team to talk about discipleship priorities and what we were going to do in the fall, every year in the fall, we try to think about things that help us understand as we maybe get back into a rhythm. Maybe we've been out of church a little bit. We're trying to find our way, right, in the world that we live in, how to have His perspective, His view. And specifically and especially when you think about the fact that from the moment you open your eyes, right, your perspective, the way you see things is being shaped. I mean, depending on who you talk to, that's probably the first thing, right? Or maybe what you talk about, what you focus on from that beginning. Or maybe what you're listening to or what you're watching or what you're seeing when you scroll. You know, the algorithm is a big deal, everybody, and the enemy knows how to use it. And there's just a lot there that's in that beginning. Sometimes it's our own personal situation. Like it's just something we're going through that can get our heart into a heavy, desperate place when actually we're abundantly and unbelievably blessed. You know, but it's hard to see what we need to see and how we need to see. And here's what I know. As Christ followers, we're called to align with Jesus, to see it the way He sees it. And we can only see it that way if we see from His perspective. Are you with me this morning? We need His perspective. Hence the reason Paul wrote in Romans chapter 12 and verse 2, he said, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world. And let me just pause there for a quick second and say, recognize the world he was writing to is not that dissimilar to our world, to the Roman Empire. Rome, that next great empire that Daniel the prophet had spoken about, and Rome, that was the people of Rome, not all the people in the kingdom, but all the people that were Roman were generally well-to-do, had plenty of discretionary time, Western civilization before there was Western civilization, and didn't do well with it either. Whole lot of broken, whole lot of lost, whole lot of perversion, human sacrifice, all of it was a part of this broken culture. But there was a lot in it that wasn't bad, right? The Roman road and the buildings and the aqueducts and all the things that they did well could shade the perspective about all the things they did, though those weren't all good, right? So Paul, in that context, is saying, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think, your perspective. Then you will learn how to know God's will. Everybody say God's will. You know God's will. You can't fault the preacher for saying, let's try to discern God's will, which is good and pleasing and perfect. Now, anytime we start talking about doing a series, the first thing I have to do is go back and forth with the creative pastor, who happens to be Jacob, and I'll come up with a title, and he'll say, well, that's not going to be very easy to, make that have a bit of a zip to it or whatever. And so in this context, when we were talking about this as a team, I was like, I kind of know. I feel like this series is going to be like about comprehensive Christianity. He didn't like that at all. That's hard, comprehensive. But I believe that that's true. Like when our life with Christ is what it is meant to be, it's going to have a comprehensive impact on us and who we are. More than even how we think, who we actually are. And so then, but he kiboshed that idea. So then I came up with one he liked even less. I said, what about systemic faith? He said, it sounds a little bit like a disease. But if you understand the definition, I'm looking at him through the camera. If you understand the definition of the word systemic, it means, again, and it is a little bit like a sickness that could impact every part of your health or being, but that's who God means to be for us, only in the most positive way we could ever hope or imagine. Like, all right, that's our faith life. No space, no hurt, no history, no perspective beyond His ability to heal and redeem. Isn't that incredible? When you think about how God's perspective, the first would be how he sees me, for me. Like, I want to know what does God see when God sees me? You understand, like, identity is something we're pretty confused about in this world, but what does God say? What does God see? Or maybe for some of you in the house that are married, right? How does God see your marriage? You have a perspective and you like whatever you are about it, but what does God see? Or maybe in your singleness, you're like, this is a curse. How does God see it? Careful, everybody. Navigating this life with God is the only way to navigate this life well. We need his perspectives, or your finances, or your struggle. Maybe there's a struggle you're dealing with. You need to see it the way that God sees it. You think about even when we do struggle and when we fail. I think one of the messages in this series will be contrasting how Judas responded to his failure and in the way that Peter responded to his failure. That's one of his perspective, God's perspective in that moment of failure, because we all do fall and fail. Or think about how you see your circumstance, your situation right now. But what about God? Hashtag the eyes of Elisha. Come on, versus the servant. We'll teach about that in this series. Perspective. What's God's perspective? How does God see our world? And how we're meant to live in it. Proverbs, Solomon said in Proverbs 14:12, there is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way to death. We think we know, but often we don't. Here's the first takeaway for us this morning, which is just a synoptic of what I've said so far. Any perspective besides God's perspective will leave even the well-trained traveler lost in the end. I don't care how good you are at traveling, at navigating. You cannot navigate this life without God's perspective. And he sees this from a different place than we do. This morning, in this house, I have this elevated stage. It's pretty tall for this room, to be honest with you. I used to love it and run and jump up on the stage before the preach. Now I got to use those steps. This is tall. But I can see you. I see you. I have the best view of the people in this room, of anyone in this room, right? If you go to sleep, I'm going to see it. But I'm not going to call you out. I'm just going to hope you get some good rest. I could use a little nap myself. I'm not going to be offended. But my point is that this elevated perspective gives me a different view. Right? And when you think about how important that is, if you know, I'm a bit of a history buff. I enjoy some history, and I'm particularly fascinated with World War II. And there's a story from World War II when Mussolini in 1944, early 44, he had essentially given up on being able to defend southern Italy. But Hitler wasn't finished with it. And so he built what they call the Gustav Line that ran just south of Anzio in Italy. And it went from coast to coast. That's about 150 miles. That's roughly the distance between here and Raleigh. And he built this incredible fortified wall and defense. And the Allies just hit it and hit it and hit it and hit it, but couldn't make any headway. So they made a plan. They would parachute behind the Gustav Line, and they would take this smaller town that was outside of Anzio called Cisterna. And they had this great plan, and all of their intelligence information said that it was not very fortified, it wasn't well defended. So they thought if they could take that, and it was the first ever time to use Rangers that had been trained by the British. And so they took this battalion of Rangers and they dropped them in, and things were going well. And as they were approaching the city, though, there was a Polish defector that came out. He had served in the German army forcibly, but he had escaped, and he said to them, "Don't go into Cisterna. It's a trap. They've set a trap for you." But they didn't believe him. Didn't believe him. And so this battalion of Rangers marched right into Cisterna with William Darby at the head, who's a heroic figure, but they lost tremendously. And here's my point in that. When you think you know, but you don't know, you're prone to put yourself in serious danger. And that's a lot of this. That's a lot of what this is about. Like, we think we know, but we don't know. We have to have his perspective. Can I get a good amen on that? I mean, that's real. The importance, back to World War II for just a second, but the importance of scout planes in World War II is incredible. Now we have satellite imagery, and they know where I'm at, you know. I got that phone over there, so I'm pretty sure folks can find me. I know when Karen stops at Food Line. I mean, I got that. But they didn't have that back in the day, and scout planes were incredibly important. Why? Because they could get high. And they could see, but even they had to search, they had to look. When you think about Pearl Harbor, and first of all, going to sleep on the enemy is always a bad idea. I don't have time to teach that, but that's true. Secondly, they had no scout planes in the sky. After that, they never didn't have scout planes, pardon the double negative, flying around Pearl Harbor, but they didn't have any up, so the Japanese were able to sneak right up on their doorstep. But then in the Battle of Midway, They had those scout planes up, and they found that Japanese fleet of carriers, and they were able to win a great victory. Here's what I want you to hear from all of that. We have an above the battlefield God. Yeah, he sees it. He knows what's actually going on. All right, and he's happy to share the information with us. Isaiah 55:8. My thoughts are nothing like your thoughts, says the Lord. And my ways are far beyond anything you could imagine. For just as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. You know, it's corn maze time again, everybody. They got a real good one over off of Blue Clay Road right near to here. I mean, it's so cool. You could just get out and take a ride on one of these side streets off of Castle Hayne Road, hit Blue Clay, go down and cut across, and back over there, there's a corn maze and ice cream for those of you who eat it. But, you know, you can get lost in there. But here's where Jesus is with his perspective. He can see. Outside, he doesn't live inside of time and space, and he can see. You hear me? Like we're walking along, and he's like, okay, take a right. Left. Okay, up there, don't go that way. That's that. You're going to walk yourself to death and end up at a dead end. Go this way. His perspective. Here's another takeaway for us. God has both the position and compassion to warrant our always trusting his perspective. If you're new to me, I snap my fingers when I think it's good. I don't really care what you think right there. I'm so thankful that he has the position and the compassion. Otherwise, I would only live lost. That's why Paul said in Colossians 3:2, set your minds on things that are above. Look up, everybody. Look up. Look up, everybody. Don't know what to do? Look up. Look to Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith. Look up. Paul had to learn this lesson, first known as Saul from Tarsus, and on his way to Damascus with letters to arrest Christ followers. And guess what happened in his life? Jesus showed up outside of Damascus on the road to Damascus, and the word says in Acts 9 that he shone a light on Paul, and Paul looked up. Saul, soon to be known as Paul. And he said, why are you persecuting me? And Saul's response was, who are you, Lord? I love that. Like he didn't know who he was, but he knew he was in charge. Because you just talked to me from a bright light. Okay, that's kind of a big deal. Here's another takeaway for us. There is no sight without light. And that's the transition into this morning's message. So I've set the series, that's about half of it. And I'm going to take the next 12 to 15 and share what would be kind of the first point from the series. And that is that there is no sight without light. Like without Jesus. Jesus said of himself in John 8:12, I'm the light of the world. If you follow me, you won't have to walk in darkness. Did you see that? You won't have to. You don't have to. You don't have to walk in darkness. You don't have to walk in ignorance. You don't have to live lost. Not if you follow Jesus, because if you follow Jesus and his perspectives, you'll have a light that leads to life. Otherwise, we might as well rewrite Amazing Grace. I once was lost and I'm still lost. I was blind and I still can't see. Go to church all you want to, but rewrite the song. Because without his perspective, we will still live lost. Light's a big deal. It is. I'm going to do my science geek for a moment here. But it is electromagnetic radiation from the sun. And the sun's impressive, everybody. God put that thing in the sky just the right distance from this, the Goldilocks planet, right? Is just right so that it could keep us warm but not kill us. And that light is critically important to us because without light, there is no sight. If it's completely dark, I don't care how good your eyes are, you still can't see. Think about that spiritually. I don't care how good your eyes are, without light, you still cannot see. And the visible spectrum is specific. It is a place in relationship with God. In the natural world, it is 300 to 700 nanometers. That wavelength of light is what creates Roy G. Biv, right? Red, I have to look at Roy G. I can't do this. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. You got to see it when the light hits it. And in those wavelengths, it will reflect whatever that wavelength is of electromagnetic radiation. It will illuminate it for us. Did you know that there are still 940 million to 1.2 billion people on this planet that don't have electricity? Also a product of electromagnetic radiation and the magnetic field, etc. But they can't just roll into their house and flip a switch and turn on a light. They don't even have that option. And they just do still have lamps and light, praise the Lord for it, but mostly they go to bed when the sun goes down. We live in a world where we can flip a switch and turn on the light, which Jesus said this about that. Because let me say this before I move to what he said. There are lots more people without spiritual light and insight than there are without physical light. And that's a big deal. Jesus said in Matthew 5, he said, you're the light of the world. So he said of himself, he's the light of the world, but he put the light in me. And he said, a city set on a hill. And he asked questions like, why would you have a light and then hide it? And in Matthew 6, he said, actually, your eye is like a lamp to your own body. But I'll come back to that in just a quick minute. But the reality is we often don't allow the light to illuminate others or even our own lives. Another takeaway for us is this. To hide the light is to waste the light and ultimately to choose darkness instead of light. My point in that is just to line up with what Jesus said here in Matthew in the Sermon on the Mount. So this is his probably most organized teaching in the Bible. And he's just essentially saying, look, you can't even just have the light. You got to share the light. And we say all the time here at 828, we don't shine the light on people. We shine the light for people. Shining a light on people is rude. Shining a light for people is a blessing. But it is believing in that light that starts but doesn't stop there, because he said again in Luke 8 and 16, these are three different occasions. So he's being repetitive with purpose. And he said, no one after lighting a lamp covers it with jars or puts it under a bed, but puts it on a stand so that those who enter may see the light. Don't hide the light of Jesus in your life, because you'll accidentally hide it from yourself. And then your perspective will be lost. Also, that's a fire hazard. Put a light under your bed. That's the only place he actually said that. Come on. Some of us do that, and we're burning our own house down. Because we know, but we're not doing what we know is so. Thomas Fuller said that this way. Zeal without knowledge is like fire without light. You can get a fire, but you better let it be a light, or it's going to burn you. And probably some others too. And then, in the Sermon on the Plain. So there was the Sermon on the Mount, and then Luke records in Luke 8 there another time when he was just sharing. But in the Sermon on the Plain, the context is different. For this, essentially him saying the same thing again. And this time he's talking to the Pharisees. This isn't in the Sermon on the Mount. He's talking to the Pharisees. These are religious leaders who, they were Jewish, should have been God followers who had access to the knowledge that should have revealed to them the right perspective, the light, but they're not. And so he says to them in Luke 11:33, no one lights a lamp and then hides it under a basket. Instead, a lamp is placed on a stand where its light can be seen by all who enter the house. And then this, he said, your eye is like a lamp that provides light for your body. When your eye or perspective is healthy, your whole body is filled with light. But when it's unhealthy, your body is filled with darkness. He's saying to the Pharisees, look, you've restricted my perspectives. You keep me out of certain spaces. I mean, so he's saying, look, the light, basically, again, no one hides a light or a lamp. They don't buy a lamp and light it to hide it. But the accusation in this is that you're actually hiding it from your life. You're keeping me, my will, my word, my perspective. He's not talking about sharing it with others in this context. He's talking about us. He's talking to us about us. What do you do with the light of God in your life? Are there dark areas where you've kept him out? Are there perspectives or opinions about you or others or the world that God doesn't get to speak into? Because that's what this is about. That's what he's saying here. Another takeaway for us is this: giving the truth and perspectives of God the prime space in every part of our lives is what it means to follow Jesus. Don't keep him out of any space. We say around here, I ask you all the time, I want us to remember it. Where does Jesus belong in your life? Say it louder. The decision-making center of your soul. That's where he belongs. Anywhere else, and he's not God. He's either Lord of all or he's not Lord at all. By the way, he sees us better than we do. Certainly better than I do. This week, this word, oof, I've been in a wine press. I feel like it's just been squeezing it out of me. It's been hard, frankly, to be honest with you. I'm sure it's not Gethsemane, but at times it's felt it like it a little bit, because it's not my will but yours to be done. Not my will but yours to be done. It's hard. It's worthy work, because otherwise we're going to set ourselves up for disaster and we're going to hurt somebody along the way. There's only one light. There's only one perspective. That in the end, and it reminded me this week when I was struggling a little bit, it reminded me of that old song. Remember that? Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and, I love this part, grace. And then this. Oof, this is tough, everybody. I feel this. Luke 11:35, he said, and then he finished speaking straight to the Pharisees. So he says, go back to 34, when your eye or perspective is healthy, your whole body is filled with light. But when it is unhealthy, your body is filled with darkness. And then make sure the light you think you have is not actually darkness. There's a whole lot of thoughts and opinions right now. We got to run back by Jesus, everybody. Run them back by Jesus. Let's double check it. Sometimes we are arguing with God. Don't argue with the light. So I'll tell you a quick story. Chris is going to join me on the stage. But years ago, when Karen and I were doing Chi Alpha, next Sunday is Student Sunday here at 828. I'm amped about that. And love our Chi Alpha peeps. But Chi Alpha is just a university student ministry, and Karen and I were doing that when our boys were in elementary school, and before that at Louisiana Tech. And we used to do this thing we called Free Food Friday. So every Friday we would do free food. It's pretty well named, I thought. And we had loads of international students that would love to come. And then during the week, I often would set up what we called a contact table. We would put books and literature out on this table, and I would sit somewhere in the quad, Louisiana Tech, a beautiful quad. Looks a lot like Wilmington in certain spaces. Has live oaks and some hanging moss, and had the fountain in the middle and this beautiful red brick wall that went all the way around so you could sit on it and chat with people. And I used to just sit out there and talk to people about God and such. And this particular day, this young lady that had been to our Free Food Friday several times from Columbia, international student, she showed up and she's just chilling and chatting. And then she says to me, she says, I really like you, you people from Chi Alpha. I said, oh, awesome, we like you too. She said, but I do have one problem with you. I said, oh, really? What's that? Sorry. And she said, well, you think Jesus is the only way. You got me there, but we love everybody. I mean, we ain't allowed that belief to cause us to be, no, you are some of the kindest people I've ever met. But she said, truth is relative. There are lots of ways that lead to God and to heaven, not just Jesus. I said, well, I don't believe truth is relative. I think truth by definition, I mean, you're rolling down a philosophical conundrum here. Thank you, everybody, for helping me with that word. Apparently, I can't say it. And truth by its very definition is absolute. And there are certain things that are just opinions. Like you could say it's hot when I say it's cold, although if it's boiling lava, it's hot, everybody. I mean, that just is what it is. It doesn't matter what we say. But we're talking about those things that either are or aren't. And there are a lot of those in this life. One of them is Jesus. Anyway, she says, no. Let me explain. She said, see that wall? She said, if I look at that wall, it was a red brick wall, everybody, but she said, if I look at that wall and when I see that wall, it's blue, then that's truth for me. And if you look at it and you see it as red, then that's your truth. And the Holy Spirit helped me right there because I'm not this smart. And I said, well, actually, if the wavelength of light, which happens to be 700, that wall reflects in the vision spectrum is red, the wall's red. Doesn't matter what you think, doesn't matter what I think. And if you see it as blue, the wall's still red. You just have a vision impairment. And she said, ooh, that's good. That's a direct quote. She said, that's good. Well, it's true. My point in that, though, is that sometimes we're arguing with a wall. I mean, this word bounces back pretty clear for the most part, I think. It's meant to set our priorities and our perspectives, and don't argue with the wall. Then he said in verse 36, if you are filled with light, here's the good news, with no dark corners, then your whole life will be radiant as though a floodlight. We're filling you with light. None of us have gotten completely there, by the way. We're still working on it. We all got some dark corners. I know I do. I'm working on it right now in this moment with Jesus. Try to get Jesus in there. I want his light to shine into everything I think. His perspectives, everybody. His perspectives. Last week, spoke a word about being a friend and what a friend we have in Jesus and how to be a friend to Jesus. And I just talked about how amazing it is. Revelation 3 says he stands at the door and knocks. And I said to you, that to me is just incredible, that the King of creation would come to my door, to the door of my heart and knock, instead of say, hey, I'm up here if you need me. You know where to find me. But he's God, and yet he comes and he knocks. Every dark corner, Jesus was saying, if that light, if you'll take me into every place, every desperation, every lost and broken perspective, or every confusion you have about your identity or your destiny, that place where you think that there's no hope, take the light in there. That place where you only live angry, take the light in there. Take the light in there. And here's Jesus. Knock, knock. Who's there? I heard you say someone who cares. Somehow you see me through the darkness in this place. Beyond belief that you'd still knock even after all the doors I've locked. Amazing is the word to best describe your grace. I came here on my own, yet with all the pride I've shown, here you are to direct me towards your will. Worldly wisdom notwithstanding, big opinions, lots of planning. But when all is said and done, you alone your plans fulfill. God, help us see the way you see. No other view in life for me. I'm all done with believing. Without you, we'll find our way. You're discerning and deciding. In everything, I'll be confiding. Please light the path ahead. That's the prayer. I'll pray. I'm 58, y'all. Probably got a few minutes. Still hang out. Hallelujah. But I've seen quite a bit. Sometimes I feel like I've seen it all. It's not true, but sometimes I'm like, I've seen it all, I've heard it all. All the advice, all the, and here's where I'm at. One last takeaway. I'm done with considering perspectives on matters that matter that don't consider God and his word the final authority. All done. Now, there are lots of perspectives that are meant to help us understand his perspective. Karen is actually working her way through a book right now called God's Plan for Well-Being. And she was showing me something last night when I was talking through some of this with her. And in this book, the author, Dave Smith, says, when looking at the dashboard of our lives, again, the reality is that most of us probably don't have the time even to access all the professional help that we could get from even godly coaches and counselors. Thank God for it, by the way. That's helpful. But he says, there is someone who knows more about your physical well-being than the best physical trainer, nutritionist, sleep expert, or doctor. He knows more about your emotional well-being than the best psychologist or counselor. He knows more about your spiritual well-being than the best guru, religious leader, or philosopher. I would add pastor or preacher. He knows more about your relational well-being than the best relationship coach or marriage counselor. He knows more about your financial well-being than the best financial planner you could possibly find. Now again, in the preceding paragraphs, he was encouraging us to use godly experts. Don't misinterpret what he's saying, but he is saying this. He knows more about your financial well-being than the best financial planner you could possibly find. He knows more about your vocational well-being than the best career advisor. Who am I talking about? I'm talking about God himself. Maybe you're sitting here this morning, you're like, oh, that's great. But it's just, inside these spaces, the dark is just too dark. If you only knew how dark it was in here. Too far gone. And I would say to that, never. I want to tag in with the psalmist who said, even the darkness is not dark to you. It's too broken. It's too far gone. No, it's not. The night is as bright as day. Darkness is as a light. With you. You just need his perspective. This is a morning for surrender. Just to say, God, I want what's in here. I want what comes from you to lead the way and to define my discerning, my deciding, my believing, my hoping, my living. A new perspective. In Jesus' name, let it be so. God, help us today to take a step toward opening every place and space in our hearts to your light, to your perspective, your revelation about our situation or our hearts. We would ask today you grace us not to withhold anything from you. Come into every place, every space. Let it be so. I speak Jesus. I speak Jesus over all of it. Jesus, 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 Jesus. Just walk through the areas of your heart and your life right now. Every place of concern. Every place of consideration. Just walk through there. I dare you this morning in this worship moment. And just say, Jesus, 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 Jesus. Jesus, 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 Jesus. I don't care if you got to just Jesus, Jesus, Jesus.